Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be getting started in just a moment, but as folks get logged in, I'd love to tell you about some upcoming events that you can take a look at and participate in. On Wednesday, June 26th, we are going to have a webinar on workplace mistreatment, evidence of prevalence of antecedents, impacts, and intervention with Dr. Albert Zhu. You can learn more about that on the CA Labor Lab website. I'm going to put that link in the chat there. Also, our presentation recordings from our recent symposium, Modern Work and Worker Voices, are now officially available as of yesterday on our YouTube. I'll put the link in the chat for that as well. And it is my pleasure to welcome everyone here today on behalf of the California Labor Lab, a NIH Center of Excellence for Total Worker Health. We're so pleased you could join us. A few housekeeping announcements. You will be muted during this presentation. So if you have a question, please go ahead and enter it into our online Q&A box, and we'll save time at the end of the presentation to address as many questions as possible. This presentation is being recorded and will also be made available on the California Labor Lab and Center for Occupational and Environmental Health YouTube page within the next 5 business days. And all participants who log in with their registration email today for the full live presentation will receive an email tomorrow with a link to an evaluation form that will qualify you for a certificate of completion with 1 continuing education contact hour. Once the evaluation is completed, you'll be able to access and print your certificate. It's now my pleasure to hand it over to Dr. Ed Yellen.
Thanks, Michelle. And it is a real pleasure to introduce Dr. Cristina Banks. I've known Dr. Banks for about 15 years and have known her to be one of the most creative academics I've ever worked with, and it's been a distinct pleasure to do so for more than a decade now. She founded and is the director of the Interdisciplinary Center for Healthy Workplaces. She wears a second hat as the Director of Outreach for the California Labor Lab, and the project that she's reporting on today sort of sits astride those 2 centers. And as if she isn't wearing enough hats, she's also a director of a center that's being founded as part of the HOSCHOOL, the Center of Excellence in Workplace Mental Health. So she is, as we would say, a well-centered person. This project is really dear to the California Labor Lab because a lot of us are involved in research that can describe ways of making work better. But this project describes an effort that Dr. Banks led at the hobby school to actually put into practice the principles of the Total Worker Health Program. And it is rare that academics can be in on the ground zero and actually transform work in both its physical and social spaces to make it better for the people who will toil there for generations to come. So with that as background, Dr. Banks.
Thank you, Ed. And I must say, you've been a wonderful leader of the California Labor Lab and a true colleague for all 15 years. And I appreciate the introduction.
Thank you.
And I want to say welcome to everyone for today's webinar. I hope you will learn something new today that you don't normally run across, and that will be useful to you sometime in the future. I also want to start by saying thank you to my colleague, Dr. Sally Augustine, for her great work in this area and for her teaching me a lot of what I'm going to discuss today. So let's begin. And that would be good if I could advance it. Okay, the place we need to start is the goal. The goal is achieving well-being. And there are many different definitions of well-being, but I particularly like this one, which is the state of positive mental, physical, and social functioning in which workers' experiences of their work and working conditions enable them to thrive in their overall lives, contributing to their ability to achieve their full potential in their work, home, and community. This is actually a definition of thriving that was created by the Harvard Group Center of Excellence for Total Worker Health. And I appreciate them creating this definition because it frames what we're going to talk about today. So what does this really look like, well-being? And here are some ways that I interpret what people need to experience in order to experience thriving at work. It supports workers doing their work well. So productivity is very important. Provides opportunities for cognitive refreshment, not just toiling away, and provides comfortable amounts of environmental control, which means air, humidity, temperature, these kinds of things. Supports bonding among coworkers and management, protects worker safety and security, and provides choice in the place and timing of activities. This is the way we want to end up, no? But let's think about this. I am contrasting two different views of workplaces. The one on the left is what architects build and what they see, what they try to create. They are looking at structural integrity, beauty, their brand, and functionality, and of course, building it to the client's needs. But workers see the picture on the right. And what this is suggesting is that people see it very differently. They're looking at how will we get around? How will we find what we need? Where will we be located? What is near to us? And how will this work for us? So these two views don't necessarily merge in a synchronous way. But let's ask the question, how do we make both people happy? That's what I'm going to take on today. So let's turn to how the physical environment can be built best for workers. So we have to ask the question, what do we understand about the relationship between the physical environmental features and occupant health, safety, well-being, and productivity? Do we know very much? And can we capitalize on that? Well, it turns out that we know quite a lot. There are multiple areas of study and best practices that have shown us what works. And a sample of these, of how they can contribute, follows after this slide. What's important to know is that each contributes to a physical environment that enables well-being. And you might be more familiar with how these physical environmental features interfere with your ability to achieve well-being. So how do we build workplaces that enable well-being? So specifically, I will need to show you several tables that connect different features of the physical environment to health, safety, and well-being. All of this information, I have to say, is evidence-based and well demonstrated in different ways. So here goes. Here's our first table, taken from architecture and design and environmental psychology. The features on the left are indicating the structural characteristics of the building, the structural elements of what is built into the physical environment. And with each one, we identify what are the risks in the decisions that are made in terms of what they build. And then what are alternative things to build that are actually health promoting and offers protection for health and well-being. So obviously building materials, many of you who are in industrial hygiene and occupational medicine and nursing know about the impact of toxic chemicals and toxic materials. And so that can affect our health. But the natural materials can also improve our health. And this is through a principle called biophilia, which I'll elaborate on in a minute. Windows and views are also a decision made by the architects in terms of the structure. The daylight is very important, and it's very important for circadian rhythm and also for views of nature. Again, this is a biophilic aspect and also the ability to restore one's health and cognitive abilities and produce calmness when we are looking out the window, especially to a green scene, a nature scene. Stairs and walkways are very important. We have to be concerned with foot traffic and the noise that gets generated and the confidentiality that might be compromised when people walk behind our workstations or our desks. Strategic placement of stairs for physical movement and also walkways that avoid walking through work areas is very important for concentration and control of noise and also protecting privacy. And then the sheer element of square footage and floor build out can determine how much noise is going to be there and what different kinds of workspaces can be placed and where, what's adjacent to what. And what we want to do is have easy access and purpose design spaces, and that we don't mix different kinds of spaces like social spaces with concentration spaces, because they clash and interrupt each other. Oh, one thing I should mention about the previous slide is that typically occupants don't have a say in any of those features that we just covered, but they do have an impact on the workplace's functionality for workers. And that is true of this slide as well. If we look at the contributions from technology and engineering, we look at the focus on the building's structural elements that are built, that are created by the utilities and the systems that are designed into the building. So we have things like internal lighting, air and ventilation, sound and noise, temperature, humidity, smells. And this is what we typically call indoor environmental quality. And so it is the indoor environmental features that can either harm our health and well-being because of various things that are listed under risks. For example, disrupting your circadian rhythms by the kind of lighting that there is, that we want blue light for concentrated work, and we want red-orange light for social and end of work purposes. And a lot of that has to do with how melatonin is activated or suppressed through the light. We know a lot about air and how important it is to have fresh air exchange through the HVAC system. That's a major way we can actually kill pathogens through the addition of UV light. Sound and noise, huge disruption of activity. And so we need to control that. So there actually is technology out there that disrupts intelligible speech. And a biophilic element here is natural sounds, which are calming and restorative. And they too can be disruptive of intelligible speech. We can still hear people talk as long as we can't understand what they say. And this is very important to control disruption. Temperature and humidity are huge elements of comfort and health. You might have heard of the sick building syndrome, which is a problem with temperature, humidity, and polluted air. It makes people sick. And so we need to control these elements so that we do drive comfort. And the importance of this cannot be understated, because overstated, because when we have discomfort due to any of these indoor environmental qualities, it can make us sick, and it can also be highly disruptive. So there's a new element now that we can add to workplaces where we can have zone control, and in fact, individual desk control. And of course, you know about some people being too hot, some people being too cold, sitting right next to each other, and they fight over the adjustment on the heat and cooling system. And then in terms of sensors, what's really important here is being able to optimize, but it has to be human-centered sensors, in the sense that it is detecting what people truly need. And so I'll talk more about this in a minute in terms of space availability. Although we do have a new kind of building called a smart building, which has all of the systems that we're talking about here in an optimization routine controlled by an algorithm. One of the things you might have experienced is looking for a room reservation in a meeting room, and you get turned down. And that's because either the number of meeting rooms do not meet demand, but these optimization routines don't record failures, in other words, rejections. So we're still working on that. Hopefully we'll get that worked out soon. Again, typically occupants don't have any say in any of these features, so we get what they build in. Looking at occupational health and public policy, it may be obvious to many of you how these elements of the physical environment can affect health, well-being, and safety. Furniture is well known by those folks in the ergonomics human factors area. Obviously, ill-fitting and uncomfortable and inflexible and harmful furniture is something to avoid. We do have now more understanding of universal design, which means all types, flexibility for maximizing fit for all types. Equipment is also well known in terms of what we need to do with respect to different kinds of equipment and tools that can be added to the workplace. Safety and security is also important, in that there are safety controls, hazards are removed, easy access, and this is for a sense of safety and comfort, knowing that our health and well-being is being protected. And then smells, and in terms of space, it's important that we have multiple spaces to be able to secure, as we need different kinds of resources in those spaces. And then finally, compliance, OSHA compliance, employment law compliance. To the extent we can surveil to ensure compliance, not productivity, but instead compliance with the law and regulations, detecting that, and then reporting that for correction is very important. To some extent, occupants are asked about some of these features, but typically occupants are given just choices, this or that. Do you prefer this fabric or that fabric? Do you prefer this kind of chair or that kind of chair? And this is very limiting. In fact, all of these factors, all of these features are important for you to have some kind of input in. And then finally, IO Psychology and Business Administration does give us some information that helps us design workspaces that work for people. So we're actually focusing on the work aspects here. And And work is facilitated through the configuration of elements within the workplace and the types of spaces that people can use. So workspaces in general, they have to have flexibility in their use, in that the sense of that if there are different activities that need to be that need to occur in these spaces, that they're able to do that, and their provision does needed. So it's really the amount and the type of spaces that is important to build in. Work seating, you probably have had some experience with this, that when that work seating is not private or quiet for focused work, or you're not close to your team members, or there's no ownership of a desk or a space or an office, that can add to a lot of job stress. And also, you don't have the resources you need in order to do your work well. Non-work seating is also important because we need to look at the social development within the workplace and the creation of social cohesion. We also need to sequester social spaces so that they're distant from high focus areas, so there isn't a bleeding of social activities with focused work. That creates a lot of frustration, and those are difficult working conditions. Healthy food is another element. So we need facilities for on-site food service and also access to food 24/7. So you think 24/7, usually there's a cafeteria and you can only eat between 11 and 2 or something like that. But there are provisions that can be made so that you can have access to healthy food 24/7 with healthy vending machines. And then finally, electronic support. I'm sure you have had some difficulties with a reliable Wi-Fi, maintained and functioning electronic equipment, instructions for how to use it. But you've got to build this into the workplace and have sufficient wiring and sufficient equipment in order to have this kind of support. Okay, so many of these features we've just looked at here either are not something that occupants have much say about, and many of the features, particularly in the IO Psychology and Business Administration set, where it's looking at the work itself, that is really decided on the basis of costs instead of worker needs. So without a clear and detailed understanding of how people need to work and use resources, many of these features fall short of our needs. So it does take an integrated approach. No one set of features provide an environment where workers can thrive. So we have to have an integrated approach. So the question is, how do we create an integrated approach? Well, one way is to think about how total worker health can provide the framework for the integration of the physical environment with worker health, safety, and well-being. So we're going to think about now how total worker health contributes. So what the heck is the total worker health approach? For all of you who are unfamiliar with total worker health initiative, the program through NIOSH, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, this is the definition of total worker health. The approach is defined as the policies, programs, and practices that integrate protection from work-related safety and health hazards with promotion of injury and illness prevention efforts to advance worker well-being. Well, that's a big bucket of it covers a lot of things. So we have to dig a little deeper here in order to know how total worker health addresses the nature of work and work environments to ensure prevention of harms and promotion of health and well-being. Oh, but before we go there, why isn't total worker health involved in workplace design and construction? I hate to say it, but there are lots of reasons, but I'm only going to name 3. The first reason is that architects are not trained in designing for health, safety, and well-being. Doesn't exist. Oh, health professionals are not trained in environmental psychology and architecture to know how the physical environment contributes to health, safety, and well-being. Oh, one more thing. Occupants are not aware of how the physical environment actually affects their health, safety, and well-being, other than the specific areas that they are taught about ergonomics and toxics, for example. So we have a lot of siloed activity here that prevents this to be a natural construction. But we're going to break that down. They actually have a lot to do with each other. Now, this slide should be overwhelming. How can total worker health help? Well, total worker health has identified 75 different issues that they think total worker health can address. And I'm not going to go through each one, I promise. But I am going to go through a set of 3 different categories which might look familiar to you. And that's these. These come from the first 3 categories from that list. And if you look through the actual issues that they want to address, don't they sound familiar from what I just went through with these tables? I hope you're saying yes. And so let's talk about how we can integrate total worker health with the development of a new building. And so I'm going to talk through a project that I was involved in as part of the Interdisciplinary Center for Healthy Workplaces in the creation of a new building at the Hobby School, or the Hobby School of Public Affairs at the University of Houston. And all of this work happened in 2023, and it took about a year to get to the point where we can actually design a building that will support health, safety, well-being, and productivity. All right, this is a busy slide, but what I am showing you is what the process is. Okay. So what we have to do is create a plan before anything is built. And the plan is very important because it details all the major decisions that are made with respect to what that business will look like and how it will operate. Typically, occupants are not involved at the beginning of the process of creating this plan. They are involved, if at all, in the later stages of the plan, like these choices. Do you want this fabric or that? You know, what work do you do, and where can we place you? I'm downplaying that because the quality of the information that comes back to the architects and the construction folks who are going to put this plan together, that information is not very helpful in terms of designing it for health, safety, and well-being. But the process I'm going to lay out for you is very helpful, as it turned out to be. So here are the steps. We first introduce the process and the rationale with the client, why the Interdisciplinary Center should have been involved in this process, and they bought into it. And then we define the work and the experience qualities needed for the occupants to feel that this is a kind of building that's going to support their health, safety, well-being, and productivity. And we start that process by defining the overarching outcomes and vision of the building. And that translates into, if it has to be, have this feel, then we need to build this stuff. So once we define the work and experience qualities, then we explore different options for space considerations. So we translate the experience qualities into design qualities. Now, you're not going to find a book, a reference that explains this in very plain language. That translation really hasn't been done well to date. But we are starting to create that kind of knowledge so that we can do that kind of translation, and it then becomes automatic when people are thinking about putting this plan together. So translate the experience qualities into design qualities, and then explore ways design qualities may be expressed in the new building. And so we then articulate what space needs to look and feel like, given the objectives, and then produce a design that has the requirements and specifications for the new building. I know that's a lot to absorb, but this is the process that we went through, and it seemed to work. And in order to see how the whole timeline of what was done when, it's characterized here. And what's important to note about this timeline is that we have to identify what work needs to be done and how it should be done. That's the occupants. What do they need to be doing in this building? And that we need to make that really clear by getting that data from the client. And then the design requirements and specifications are identified to achieve those objectives. And the contractor, in this case, this is the design team, looks at those requirements and figures out what are the design schematics that will meet those objectives. So they go ahead and design different options and building options. And then given those options, we compare it against what the objectives are, and then they lay it out. Everybody signs off on it, and then we have a plan. Sounds pretty straightforward, right? Okay, so I'm going to tell you what method we went through, and this is I'm going to describe how we decided to go through this. This isn't necessarily the way to go about this, but it is the way we went about it, and it worked pretty well. There's certainly lots of room for improvement, but hopefully this will be easier the next time around. All right, so the first thing we need to do is to lay out what needs to be done. So here is the sequence of activities that provide the critical input for the designers and construction team to build out occupant needs. And this is what is not done well by architectural and design teams who have the assignment of creating a new building plan. This is a lot more than what they typically ask from occupants. So the first thing is to conduct a visioning and objectives workshop. Well, what does that mean? That means, what's the end point that they want to get to? What do they want to see when everything is said and done? So the next step is to figure out, what do people do in that building? And you can start with the ONET, which is Department of Labor database that describes about 26,000 jobs. But that's only a starting point. And then you collect work activities data from each of the occupants so you know who has to do what in the building. And I'll tell you what's unique about that particular data collection in a minute. You collect the data not only what work activities are done, but the time spent performing those work activities and the work context features, which I'll describe as well in a minute. You aggregate all that information to create profiles of activities and context features to cover all of the workforce. And then you translate those work activities and context requirements into workspace designs. So I'm going to tell you how each of those are done. Let's talk with a visualization exercise. So this is the endpoint. And so we did it in two parts. One is asking the dean of the school to stand up and talk to us about what his objectives were. And typically, you know, they're not very detailed. It's just very general. So the dean, started off by giving us broad descriptions of what he'd like to see, but then we dug in deeper and said, how do you want other people to see the school and say about the school? So then we asked all of the occupants of the building in a 5-hour visioning exercise, what would you want, and then fill in the blank, to say about the school? And obviously what we're getting at here is what the building needs to look like and function like for people to say, this is wonderful. I love this building. It's exactly what I want. So we explored that and we got some really interesting descriptions of what we want all these people to say. The second thing we did is we asked people to describe their emotional response to a variety of spaces. So we provided them a pretty thick book of pictures of different kinds of spaces, and they fell into these categories. We weren't saying, okay, do you want that chair, or do you want that a window, or, you know, do you want that desk? We were saying, here's a space. Tell us your emotional response to that. It served two purposes. One is to figure out what mattered to them in those spaces, because they were always kind of describing what they wanted in that space, what they liked about it, what is the particular aspect of it that they liked. But the other thing we did was to broaden their understanding of the variety of spaces that they could have, because maybe they only saw one or two different kinds of workplaces, and that can't be the basis for all of these decisions, right? So we briefed them on a variety of different spaces, and then could find out of all the things that they were responding to, what really mattered to them. So then this was the vision statement that was created as a function of that visioning exercise. And obviously I'm not going to read it to you, but I will note that what came out strongly is that they wanted the school to foster a sense of belonging, purpose, accomplishment, and well-being. And that came from the emotional responses from those two sets of questions. All right, let's talk about how we measured what they did. What's the work that was done? So here are most of the different work categories that we presented to each of the occupants, and we asked them to indicate whether they did work in any of these areas. And so we could get a profile of what kinds of work activities they performed. These are characterized, though, in terms of what would make a difference in the kind of workspace that they needed. So high concentration work really needed quiet and sequestered space with good lighting, for example. And cultivating relationships was a socializing space, or a gathering place. So instead of using the typical list of work activities that you might find in IO psychology, these were purposeful descriptions of activities that had space quality implications. So we got responses to what kind of work they did. We also asked them to indicate, given that kind of work that they do, what are the contextual features that were associated with that work? So they indicated, I need this, 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 and this in order to do high concentration work, or socializing work, or teaching, and so on. And so we kind of had a menu, or a recipe, if you will, of the kinds of design qualities that had to be associated with the work that they did. We then aggregated this information across all of the occupants and created profiles of needs for each occupant group. And the groups are, faculty and research associates, and staff connected with students, staff connected with the executive, and so on. These profiles of needs then got translated into space requirements for each occupational group. Once we had the recommendations for space requirements, then we could look at the entire occupational, the whole workforce, and draft floor layouts given these space requirements. Can you imagine what the designers thought when we handed over space requirements and the floor layouts? Well, it didn't go smoothly, because the designers and construction team was working independently of us. We kept throwing the information over the wall to them and saying, here's the occupant data, and this is what they want built, and here are the implications for what they do, what they need in order to be effective, and also to make sure that their health, safety, and well-being wasn't compromised by what is created. So you can imagine there was negotiation at each step of the design process. And so we had to negotiate the square footage. We had to negotiate the allocations for different kinds of activities. We had to negotiate what were the design qualities that went into those spaces. For example, how many private offices did we need to build based on high concentration and high confidentiality kinds of work activities? They weren't used to that. They wanted to put a lot more open floor, open office workstations, because that's what they're used to doing. Eventually, we got to joint decision-making on floor assignments of the different occupational groups and different types of spaces. And we also got joint decision-making on key features of the building in order to maximize the client vision and objectives. But we actually got there after 9 months. So I just have to tell you one story. So what's interesting about working with people who don't share the knowledge that you have, both them with us and us with them, is that the architects and designers can pick up keywords from conversations with a client and then go design something out that maximizes those keywords. And there were two keywords that they picked up. One is collaboration, and the other word is mixing of different people who belong to the school. So what they decided to create initially was one floor that had faculty offices and instructional space and student activity clusters, social settings, and student work spaces. And we said, nope, that isn't going to work. Faculty won't come in other than teaching in that instructional space. They won't be able to do their work. And so we had to say, we need to put the faculty on a floor by themselves. And so the architect, well, then how are students going to interact with them? And so there was a negotiation about how mixing can happen, but on the faculty's terms. So anyway, the plan was written, and I'm going to share the general considerations for the building, which then became a reference point for anything that was built into the new building, that it had to meet these general considerations. First of all, the health, well-being, and productivity of building occupants is of paramount concern and must drive the design of the built environment in impactful ways. So that was a win for us. And so new ways of working and being inside public spaces during the pandemic drove the need for concerns about physical and psychological safety. So that had a lot to do with the indoor environmental quality, how that was built into the design of the space. So it had fresh air, daylighting, disinfection of the air through the HVAC system, and also the ability to protect people's safety through sensors and so on. And that the physical and educational professional working spaces work best when people came to work, when they want to be in the building, the ability to do their best work in these spaces and can fulfill their basic needs. So this was the plan in terms of its principles. And then there are specific considerations that were added to the plan. And you can see that, this had to do with specific features. So you had to put things in that would attract people to the building, because mixing with the public was very important. And it must have space for all the occupants at the time of completion, not in a phased way. It had to reflect the school's cultural values, and the building must enable occupants to communicate with the outside world. So it could be a first-tier hub for national and international affairs. All right, so I'm not going to go through each of these, but I will say that what we were able to accomplish in this plan was to make sure that all of the work activity and work context features that we developed in our early phase of this development, plan development, got integrated into the plan. And you can see here that lots of features here were important for occupant health, safety, and well-being. And 73% of all occupants participated in this effort. So with their participation came ultimate satisfaction and a sense of confidence that when the building was built, that it would meet their needs. And that is it. And for those of you who want additional information, here are some references that I can point you to. Ed.
Well, we have a lot of very interesting questions, and we have about 11 minutes to get through them. So your audience was really well connected. I'll start with the first, and that's one of the questions is, has any cost-benefit analysis studies been done? And I think this is a little succinct, but I guess another way of saying, how do you convince the suits that it's worthwhile to invest in this kind of design?
Well, whatever ROI studies are done on single factors, and they either move the needle a lot or very little. So it isn't about that at all. It's really the cost benefit analysis is about meeting the objectives that the leaders or the client is hoping to achieve. And so you show the benefit by showing how the work activity is connected to the context factors and that they directly impact whether people show up, whether they want to be there, whether they're engaged, whether they form a community, and whether they are satisfied with their surroundings. And so you find that out through what's called a POE, or post-occupancy evaluation. And those evaluations can be translated into dollars saved, dollars costs for people leaving the organization, lower productivity, and so on. So there is a way to do it. But as far as I know, this is what I'm describing here is one of the first times that this point of view of total worker health has been imposed on the architects and designers.
So I'm going to group three related questions. One is, how do you get the workers' point of view into either through unions, formal organizations that represent them, or less formal ones, into the discussion? How do you get principles of occupational health and into the discussion? And the third related question was, how can we encourage and enact more of this kind of cross-disciplinary collaboration? So certainly to involve occupational public health professionals, workers, and their advocates, and cross-disciplinary. How do you convince people to hear these other voices?
Well, first of all, it's great if you have an advocate and in the client. And the client can say, we're not going to go any farther until you listen to this. So if you have a client who understands that they get better results by integrating occupant needs into the design of any workspace, then your battle is about halfway won. But in order to get your client in that kind of a sense of agreement and support, is to bring the parties together and start talking about objectives and how the objectives can be met by different kinds of spaces. And what's interesting is the architects and designers show you what they think, and then you can say, what assumptions are you making about the workers with these designs? And when they can't explain what they're trying to achieve, and really they're just working from what they've always done, then you can have an opportunity to share what does work for the people. You see, the occupants are really the glue that brings both parties together. And so if there's an opportunity to talk through, what do we want these folks to be able to do, and then start looking at different space designs, we can tell right away whether it's going to work this way or this way. And so the architects learn through that process, and the occupants get what they want.
So there's a question here that many of us are interested in hearing the answer to, and that is what your view is of the open office design, open workplace designs, and if you, based on the work you did in this project and other projects, care to comment on the open workspace design?
You have to answer that question based on what you want people to be doing in that space. And so for architectural firms and architectural firms and project dominated kinds of activities, that open office design works well because there's a lot of interaction and people don't get too bothered by other people talking nearby. But anytime intelligible speech becomes a frustration, becomes a focus interrupter, or an annoyance in the workplace, you are actually creating frustration, which contributes directly to job stress. And of course, job stress, if done repeatedly and in a prolonged way, that's harming health and well-being. So you always start with, what do people need to be doing? And then the space design has to fit that purpose and protect whatever is being designed.
So one individual asked two related questions. I'll give you a version of both. What's the accommodation for employees with neurodiversity medical needs, for example, noise and visual distractions? Does Total Worker Health consider neurodiverse individuals? And the same individual asked, I understand the importance of natural light. Blinds that are not solid but let a percentage of light through cannot fully present glare from sunlight. Thoughts on blinds and reducing direct glare issues?
Okay, neurodiversity is a very important question being considered right now. And there is new development in architectural design and internal space design in order to facilitate neurodiverse individuals. One example is having a separate space which has open access to anyone, anytime, that has certain visual features, which allows a neurodiverse person to maintain their balance and their cognitive maintain their cognitive activity and to restore. I'm not saying it very well, but NOK is an architectural firm that has individuals who are working on that very thing. Now, in terms of daylighting and glare and blinds, there are a lot of advances now in terms of window treatments and also positioning of workstations so that you reduce the glare. And in the absence of windows, there is also an LED panel that simulates and reproduces daylight without the glare. So there's one company that makes that. It's called Coelux, Coelux, out of Italy, and their ability to create daylight without a window is pretty incredible. So we could use more of that.
One last question, which is a really important one. We all know that we start out from a set of ideals and then cost realities come in. And so the question that was asked was really, once those cost constraints re-enter the fray, how do you move towards consensus and accommodation when you can't build the ideal environment and you're forced to do some compromising?
You know, what's interesting about that question is the thought that health and well-being design somehow is more expensive. And it's really about getting in on the ground floor so that you're not talking about change orders or remodeling or whatever, but it's really understanding what is the range of options that actually serve the same purpose of health and well-being. You just need technical expertise. And because we don't have a well-developed literature and a well-developed expertise in this area of crossing the line between what occupants need and how to design for it, often the discussion of what we could build into this space is extremely limited. But I can tell you that the product development and feature development is really much, much higher than what people are exposed to typically, especially the architectural firms. They tend to focus on the same vendors, on the same designs, on the same approaches. And when you talk about, well, have you ever considered this? They see that as an extra cost.
We are at our end time in an endlessly fascinating discussion, and I will close with the note that there's a building across the street from our center, Mission Hall, where they ignored the principles in design and spent far more money in undoing the original plan to make it somewhat more hospitable to workers. So the point of that example is these principles should be brought to bear from the get-go. So thank you, Dr. Banks, and thank you for all the 125 or so people who participated in the webinar, and we look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you.